all things in fantasy, dynasty, and anything else you need to know about fantasy football. We're excited to have you. Let's get into the action. Note to self, make the intro a little bit longer. It is another episode of Fantasy Football RPG where we're going to break down when to rebuild in Dynasty Fantasy Football. We are over the moon to have you, and we are also over the moon because we are joined by two guests. You probably see this familiar face, a beautiful, handsome young man, Jake Perry. Jake, how are you?
I'm living the dream, brother. How about yourself? Evan, how are you doing? Thank you, boys, for having me once again.
Man, I'm great. Evan, how are you?
Man, I'm getting beaten up in real life work, Maybe one day we can have a little bit more fun, doing this a little bit more full time. But, for now, got a real job, and today was a doozy.
Yep, someone's got to pay the league entry fees. But we are also joined by Tim. You can find him on Twitter at Nubs. That is with 2 N's and 2 B's. Go listen on YouTube so you can see what it is. What's going on, Tim?
Not too much. Just licking my wounds in my home league where I'm 11th of 12th because I can't keep a player healthy to save my life.
Man, injuries are brutal, but it's one of the things that can launch you into a rebuild in Dynasty. So we're going to talk about that first, and then we're going to do some little week 2 recap and how it would relate to Dynasty Fantasy Football. But I just want to get right into the action, give the people some actionable advice. So, Evan, you wanted to throw this in. Why did you want to make this today's episode? And tell me what triggered your rebuild in one of our leagues.
Oh, man. Yeah. It was an injury crusade this past week. We've seen injuries happen all offseason. We've seen injuries happen week 1, and week 2 just continued the downward spiral. That's been going on for so many fantasy teams, so many players that are just out left and right. You go, man, my number 1 pick is out, my number 2, my number 3 and 4 are also out. So I am a fantastic drafter. Absolutely love it when that happens. But yeah, so the league that Mike's talking about is one of our RPG leagues and Shields. And I took the risk of going with 2 quarterbacks, and I lost Tua. So that pretty much sinks a lot of the hope that I had, especially when you also lose Christian McCaffrey. You also lose Ken Walker for a little bit. You also lose Ferguson for a little bit. And I'm pretty sure there's another wide receiver injury in there just to put the icing on the cake. So I think it was altogether 5 starters that I lost in 1 week of football. And it's multi-weeks of injuries here. So it's just telling me, these are the lights of the fantasy football ether here shining through, saying, man, it's just time to realize where you're at, realize that it's just not your year, and start planning for next season. Yeah. And why is that valuable, Mike?
Well, I want to anchor on a couple of points there. So one, they're multi-week injuries. It's not just, somebody's dinged up for a week. It's not T. Higgins where we're all expecting him to come back. These are guys that are missing valuable time that you're not really sure what you're going to do with. Before we get into our next topic, Jake, I'm going to ask you about some things that would trigger a rebuild that don't have to do with injury. But first, we have a question from K9. Thank you for tuning in on YouTube. Would you guys trade Kyren Williams, Keon Coleman, and Blake Corum for Naji Harris, Brian Robinson, and Jalen Naylor? In my mind, Kyren greater than Naji, but Keon Coleman about equal to Brian Robinson, and Blake Corum greater than Jalen Naylor. I would keep the Kyren side, but they asked because they want to hear all of the experts that we have on. So, Timmy, if you want to kick off, what do you think?
I think it's the Kyren side. Now, I'm a big Brian Robinson guy, but you have to kind of look at what you have for valuable assets in this. Coleman's most likely more universally liked, or the upside is there where he's more marketable to more teams if you want to make a deal, where Naylor is kind of limited until the starters really come back, where he has this limited window, but it's not really a dynasty value.
Yep. I completely agree. Jake, do you have different thoughts or across the board Kyren side?
It's so far the Kyren side for me that it's not even funny. Yep. To me, like, you're giving up Keon Coleman and Blake Corum for nothing in that trade. Naji and Brian Robinson, while they can be like solid weekly performers for you in terms of what they can offer you in terms of overall value, they're never going to reach the peaks that that Kyron has or can. Keon, it's still too early to make a true distinction there. Like it's buying points in the wrong way. If you're going to buy pieces, you want them to still have some prestige to them in terms of what their value is in the market. So I think if you are looking to buy points, there's a much more productive way to do it where you're not giving up the best piece in the trade and probably the second most valuable piece in the trade.
Yeah.
I think that's important real quick, just because
Naji,
Ryan Robinson, and Naylor all have a limited ceiling as well. So you're not trading for, like Jake said, you're not trading for someone that's kind of a game changer by giving up the best player.
Yep. Fast forward a year, Najee Harris doesn't have a contract. You need to figure out what team he's going to be on. Does he profile as a workhorse back? Brian Robinson needs to be 26 on the last year of his deal. Jalen Naylor probably fades back into irrelevancy. On the other side, Kyron or Blake Corum is going to be the workhorse back. You own that backfield. It's unlikely that they invest there. And Keon Coleman, the mystery card, if he turns into something, that side is going to run away with it. If he turns into nothing, it's even. So Evan.
It's also important to note that Kyron, as a non-first round pick, he's only on a 4-year deal. So he's guaranteed to be in LA this year and next. And then he is a free agent. So unless they absolutely hate Blake Corum, they think he can't be a running back in the NFL, there's a chance that still nets you, that side still nets you 2 starting running backs if a team is comfortable paying Kyron and letting him go be the guy in a couple of years.
Which would be very silly. But let's get back to, and I hope that helps you. Please like, subscribe, comment, live your life. But thanks for asking us. Jake, what would trigger a rebuild outside of injury? Are you looking at the starting lineup? Are you looking around the league? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 trains of thought that you can follow, which is one, like you brought up with the league environment. What does your league look like? Because I've been in leagues where I took over a player or an orphan team that needed to be rebuilt badly. And so I started the rebuild process. But when I was in that league, 4 other teams were trying to rebuild at the same time that I joined the league. So while there were pieces that I could sell for value, the upper echelon, there was basically like a clear top 4, 2 teams who were teetering, probably could have gone rebuild side, but were still winning frequently enough. And then the rest of the league was like trying to fire sale everybody. So because I had guys that had value, there were other teams in the league that were also trying to rebuild. They were letting their pieces go below market value just because they felt they just needed to get younger pieces, get picks for the future. So situations like that can make it really, really hard to rebuild. Whereas like you could walk into the year thinking you're going to be a rebuilding team. And I made the playoffs starting like Jordan Akins at tight end, Zay Jones at wide receiver. And I ended up 4th place in the league. And I was thinking that I had to rebuild this team. So sometimes your league environment just truly does not let you do it. And then on the flip side, if you're one of the top teams in the league, it's hard. Like you can rebuild in different ways too. So you can rebuild by getting rid of all of your old players, saying I'm going to lose this year, just taking it all the way down. But you could also be a team that won the championship last year, and you can rebuild in the sense that you're not trying to get rid of every player on your team, get as many picks and as young as possible. You can create packages where it's not really a rebuild, it's more of a retool, where you're selling off some of these pieces that have more perceived value for guys that you think have upside in the future and picks. So you could have a situation where, going into this year, you could sell a Tyreek Hill for Zay Flowers, a 1st and a 2nd. Now with the Tua injury, that looks like a great trade because Tyreek historically hasn't been phenomenal in this offense when Tua hasn't been the quarterback. Zay Flowers is the target hog in that offense. Plus I have future picks for next year. And by Tyreek underperforming, those picks become inherently a little more valuable. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go about rebuilding as it is. So I think your league environment is probably the most important aspect of, okay, now is the time to start doing this and take advantage of it.
Yep. I want to hit on that, like rebuilding versus retooling, like the different pathways to rebuilding, but it's episode 105 and we have never missed out on a listener question. So Juwan Jennings, is he now a pickup that Deebo is down? I think this is purely a redraft question, but I'll just shoot from the hip for this one. I think Juwan Jennings, you can pick him up and you can throw him in as your flex. Like He's been the team's wide receiver 3. He's familiar with the system. Ricky Pearsall, I think he's still on the pup. So now you're looking at, he's competing with Jacob Cowing. He's competing with, I can't even name the other San Francisco wide receivers. So he's going to be the team. Yeah. He's going to be the team's wide receiver 2. It might not be super profitable, but when the team is in third down situations, they need to get somebody the ball. For some reason, they target Juwan Jennings. So I'm going to pick him up. What do you guys think?
I think he's fine to pick up. I wouldn't expect Deebo production out of him.
No.
Or even Deebo usage. I think if they're going to have somebody else on that team that they use in the run game, I think it's probably going to be Cowing. Just he's smaller. So maybe they just go, instead of being a bully like Deebo can be, maybe be a wiggly guy. I don't know. But yeah. I mean, it's fine. It would depend more on who I would have to drop to pick him up.
We've seen him perform even in the playoffs last year, and he's a good run blocker. So I think that there's a reason why they decided to keep him around in the offseason. So his ceiling may be limited most weeks, but he has hit double digits before. So it's not something that's like crazy to think that they feed him in certain game environments. But you have to understand what your expectations are with him going in. And if you're thinking at best he's a flex, then anything above that, you're not like over leveraging yourself.
Yep. Completely agree. Let's get back to rebuilding strategy and topics. So Timmy, how do you do your rankings? Do you do them on tiers? Do you do them that they're purely like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? How do you go about your rankings?
Mine's kind of mine go in tiers, but I also incorporate a lot when it comes to upside. So I'm one that's held on to keeping Devontae Adams towards my top 12 in wide receiver, even though he's old. But that doesn't mean I have to operate directly. I'm not a slave to my ranks, or have to operate directly that, he's my 12. Anybody below him, I have to trade for him. Where I understand that in most environments, most receivers are not going to reach the heights that he's capable of every week, in and out. Not saying he's going to hit them every week. So I those are things that I think about. But like if I'm rebuilding, I have to understand better about what the market's ranks are, because I need to best leverage what the market is to make sure that the deals I make give me the most return coming back.
Completely agree. And I love where you went with that. So we talked with Jake a little bit about having insulated trades where you're able to trade for a player and a pick. Like you're not necessarily just trading away points. You're trading maybe somebody that you feel can leap into that next tier. So by having your own personal tiers, do you feel like that's let you work the market a little bit so that you can trade for guys within your own tier, but you're able to get, like, I was higher on George Pickens this offseason. I'm probably still absurdly high on George Pickens. Like, were you able to get players like that plus a pick because your rankings are a little bit different than the market?
Yeah, and something else too with that whole getting a player plus a pick, the moves you make don't have to be the final moves you make. So you can make that trade for the player and the pick, and maybe you hold that pick for 2 months and then you go back into the market, or maybe it's directly after, or maybe you trade for a guy and directly after you're looking to move him again. I had a league in which I got old and I only had one quarterback, which was Mahomes, but I was like, I'm just gonna kind of retool this team. It was what I would consider a rebuild, but I was able to move a lot of my older players, my Keenan Allens, my Mike Evans. And for example, I got a bunch of receivers back. I have Zay Flowers, I have Tank Dell, Jameson Williams all came off of trades, but I also was able to load up a bunch of picks where I have 2 firsts this year and 3 firsts next year, but I have Neighbors, Harrison, Dell, Flowers,
just
Jameson Williams. And then, so basically the only place I'm now missing is quarterback. So I could decide, hey, I want to go search out a deal for a quarterback and find that final super flex spot for myself. I now have the leverage to do that, or I can sit tight and compete with what I have now. Because the thing for me, my biggest approach to Dynasty is that you don't have to have the best team right now. You just have to have the best team when you make the playoffs. I don't care if I'm the 6th seed. Would I like to have the bye if I'm the 1 seed? Yes. But if I make the playoffs, I can basically do anything I need to do to tool my team up against my matchups to then try to win the title.
Yep. I love that. We're going to talk a little bit about the leverage you can gain by making insulated trades and getting a little bit of value. But first, we have another question. If you guys are listening to the recording afterwards, please hop over to YouTube, like, subscribe, comment. But Captain Joking wants to know, he sold Flowers and Worthy for Bowers. Pretty bold, but he thinks that Bowers can really launch in the upper echelon of tight ends. How would you guys feel about that trade? Let's talk about it from a rebuilding perspective. Maybe you're already set at wide receiver. You want to go get an elite tight end, or on the flip side, you're trying to start a rebuild. Bowers is balled out and you need wide receiver help. Evan, how would you value each side in this, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key in it is he's also saying, or they're also saying that they have Kyle Pitts. So Pitts still gives you a movable asset if you want to try and go get a wide receiver back. If you feel like Bowers is the guy, which he has been proving that he is one of the top tight ends in Dynasty right now. He's been putting it on the field. We've been seeing exactly what all he can do. I've been really trying to hope that he's going to show up on Next Gen Stats, just so I can see the routes that he's been running, see exactly how they're using him, all of that. That would be super nice, but not currently on there. But when you're looking at him, they're using him in the offense. Minshew loves tight ends. He's always felt like a safety blanket there historically. So that's a big plus for it. Flowers and Worthy is a steep price, especially when we're seeing the target share that Flowers has been getting, which has been nothing short of huge. I think he's 4th, 5th in targets right now. Somewhere right around there, which is absolutely huge, especially when you have Lamar throwing you the ball, who we know that's not a huge thing for him. And on top of it, we're saying redraft fantasy. Okay. 4. Okay. So he's 4th in targets. Worthy, with the news of Hollywood Brown being out the entire year, his value is going up currently. Mm-hmm. The Chiefs offense, how they use him is very interesting. And I think it's going to make it a very hard ability to know when exactly to start him, because you're not going to feel comfortable starting him every single week like you would Flowers. Flowers is a plug and play, in my opinion. He is very clearly the wide receiver that you're going to try and get in that. But yeah, all that to say, you need a tight end, fine with that. Wide receivers, though, Flowers is a very hard pill to swallow.
Yep. With the context of it being redraft, Jake, do you have any different thoughts, or feel pretty similarly that it's a steep overpay?
I'm lower than most on both of these guys. I think Flowers is a good target to have in redraft. The volume is going to consistently be there. With Worthy, Andy Reid doesn't use rookie wide receivers at a high enough clip for me to have much confidence in him. I thought we were going to see more of him so far going into the season, knowing that Hollywood was hurt. Hollywood's been hurt. As soon as we knew he wasn't going to start game 1, I thought Worthy obviously had a great game 1, but he only had 4 touches. Like
4. Thank you very much.
The volume just isn't consistently there. And I put out a thread on Twitter today of why I think we need to like reevaluate Patrick Mahomes in terms of being a high tier fantasy like a top tier quarterback. He's still one of the best quarterbacks to have in fantasy, but he's in my tier 2 now. He spreads the ball around a lot. It's not the old offense where it was Tyreek and Kelsey, and anybody else who caught a ball was going to be a surprise. This offense is built, get the ball out of Mahomes' hand quickly, let our athletes do stuff, let them go. It doesn't matter if it's a running back, a tight end, our 3rd tight end, our 4th tight end, our 5th wide receiver. They have so many unique plays that they run that I think this is a fine trade. And I would honestly, right now, this very moment, try and go trade Kyle Pitts for Deontay Johnson. Now that we know that Andy Dalton is starting for them moving forward, I think the volume starts to go back to Deontay in that offense. And this way you upgraded yourself substantially at tight end to who was my dynasty tight end 1 going into the season, is proving to me that was a correct call. And in redraft, I was worried about Bowers, but he's shown us that I don't care that Gardner Minshew's my quarterback. I'm just going to go out there and be one of, if not the best tight ends in football currently. I would take Kyle Pitts, especially if he has a decent game next week, and just go immediately move him for a wide receiver. And it's possible that you made your team better by taking a slight downgrade from Flowers to a different wide receiver, but having a very substantial upgrade from Bowers, from Pitts to Bowers. So I think it's a great trade. And even if we were still talking dynasty, I really don't think that price is too steep. But again, it just comes to knowing the market, and the market would say you paid a steep price, but the market also hates tight ends. So just some things to keep in mind.
Completely fair. If you want to see all of Jake's great threads on Twitter, follow him at Perry_FF. That's PARRY. Talking about that price in Dynasty. So thank you to our friends at Fantasy Calc. So they have Xavier Worthy and Zay Flowers on one side, Brock Bowers on the other. It shows that the Worthy and Flowers side is substantially higher. However, Brock Bowers has already launched himself into the tight end 2 on their site and has a very strong argument for tight end 1. It's better to get those ascending players early than a couple of guys like Zay Flowers is never going to launch into top 10 wide receiver range, and Xavier Worthy with his skill set is likely a boom bust player. So having a plug and play tight end is immensely, immensely valuable. So we talked a little bit earlier back to dynasty rebuilds about taking those insulated trades, getting all sorts of picks, and then having that leverage. So if you are trying to launch your rebuild, how do you make sure that you can accumulate some of those picks? I'm just going to leave that open to anybody, however you want to phrase it, interpret it. How do you get those picks early?
I think the key is recognizing which teams can afford to move them, and also targeting previous rebuilders who have stacked up a ton of future picks, because they're looking at a 20, say we're going into the season, we're looking at a team that has multiple 25 firsts, multiple 25 seconds, but right now we're looking at them. They're 2-0, top 5 in points scored in the league. Like, their team is just absolutely working out. They're going to be more willing to move those picks. And yes, those picks might be a little like projected a little bit later, but we do the exact same thing every single year where we go, oh, there's a clear cutoff at the 109 in rookie drafts. And then we get to draft season and suddenly there's like 15 guys who people think are worth first round picks, and they reach for somebody. So what you thought 110 was going to be now is the guy that you think should have gone at like 106 or 105. So there's the flexibility there, but also before those picks have true numbers attached to them, people are viewing it as a first round pick. And a lot of people overvalue that part of it because they just see the prestige of the first round pick and they go, oh, it's early. I think this other team whose first I have is also a really good team. It's probably going to be late. I'll move that one. And then they hit a situation like Evans in where they've got this team just randomly picks up multiple injuries. And all of a sudden this pick isn't worth, it's worth more than this person thought it was when they were trading it. So I think that's just an important thing to think of, is you have to identify the right people to trade with. And this is one of Tim's favorite things to talk about. So I'll bring him up and then let him go in on it. This is where having good trade relationships with your league mates is super, super important.
Am I supposed to jump in now?
Yes.
Yeah. Having conversations, understanding what their motivators are, what their interests are, then you can kind of even have penetrating questions where you pinpoint guys that they really like that maybe you don't even have at this point. But also something that goes into that, one of my favorite things to do when trying to accumulate picks is, understand that that hopium has become very mainstream across like Twitter and fantasy football, but I've talked about selling hope for like 3 or 4 seasons now. And those are to the guys or girls, players, men, male, female, that are in the thought process that they are contenders, but they are truly fake contenders. And those are the picks I like to target first as much as possible, because what I'm doing is I'm getting the most undervalued first round picks for teams that aren't actually that good, or they're going to have a drop off after this season and I go for their future firsts. And because I'm already planning a rebuild, my rebuilds don't always have to be 1 year long. I'm okay with having a more extended rebuild because I'm not trying to rebuild the 6th place. I'm trying to rebuild the 1st place. So I don't care if it takes me 2 or 3 seasons, and I have accumulated multiple early firsts. I can trade those in the draft to get multiple firsts or 1 first in the future and still get a player. So I think that that's something that's really big, is that you have those conversations. You find out this person, they really do want to compete, but they really don't have a competing roster. So they're selling me what they think is 112, and it's actually 105, 106, and next year might be 101. I did that with a team, and this person went all in, and now they have no one on their roster, and they're trying to offer me all of their bad players remaining for their first back, and I'm like, no, I'm just going to sit on it for next year, and I'm going to get the 101 in the draft.
Yep.
So
I love doing that. Maintaining good relationships, that is a constant across all these things. Evan, Jake, we play in leagues together. I feel like we have pretty good relationships. We make trades fly pretty easily.
Yeah.
I want to hammer in on what Timmy just said. You want to compete for first. You don't want to rebuild and be middle of the pack. You don't want to rebuild just to barely squeak into the playoffs. Do you guys set a firm, my goal is to compete in 2026, 2027? Or do you say, I'm going to rebuild and then just see how the roster plays out? I'm curious your thoughts, because I have my own.
Yeah, I always just let it play out. And that's where doing things like Timmy suggested with targeting not just the upcoming rookie draft picks, but future picks can really come in handy, because you can say, oh, okay, these teams don't want to give up their 25 first, so let me target their 26s. You may have a couple, you may be able to pick up a couple extra first or second in this class, but what you really did is you stacked your 26 draft pick room. So now you're sitting on all of this value that is just going to get more and more valuable as we go and get closer and closer to the season. And then if you hit on a couple of those 25 picks, it's 7-8 weeks into that season and you're sitting there in 6th place. You don't have to wait until we have that draft next April or next May, June,
Sure.
July, August to use those 26 first. Those are now the upcoming classes first. So you can make that decision to jump in head first for that year, target and use those future picks that have just basically just been sitting in your pocket collecting dust. And all of a sudden your team is super competitive, and then you go and win, and you still may have extra picks left over at that point for the next draft, where you've just accumulated this opportunity to just keep building and building and building. And that's where too many people mess up, is they get and they also get too overinvested in one class. I've seen teams that are like, look at me, I've got the entire first round of 2024 and I've got half the second, half the third. And it's like, cool. It's awesome to sit there and have 22 draft picks until you have to go and make cuts to your roster. You dropped 4 guys who you thought you were good. We have a 25% hit rate after the first round anyway on rookie picks historically. So what you're going to maybe best case scenario in that situation, walk out of there with 8 guys who maintain value. So you gave up all this value for nothing in a lot of ways, whereas you could have done, like we talked about earlier, picked up some upside players that we know now are good players who have, just not in the right situation yet, or undervalued guys who have performed, but the market just doesn't value them, like a Brian Robinson or Naji from that first trade. You don't have to give up premium assets just because they're scoring points. Rebuilding is so complex, and people try and dumb it down too frequently, when you have to recognize that, Evan, you can look at your team right now and be like, this team is not going to win anything this year. I have to rebuild. But it's just about being patient with it and recognizing that, okay, I do want to move Christian McCaffrey. I'm going to get nothing if I move him right now. So let me wait until he's back and I know more who the contenders are, and he's back to scoring 20 points a game. Because those teams are going to go, I'll give up the 112, because that's what they're thinking. Like Tim talked about, the hope aspect of it. And then he gets hurt again in week 12, 3 weeks after you sold him, and he scored 160 points for them. And now they don't have a running back for their first round of the playoffs. And all of a sudden, what they thought was the 112 is now year 107.
Which is hilarious, because Jake, I said almost that exact same thing to Mike when we were talking about it. I was like, man, no chance that I'm moving off of McCaffrey. I'm going to let him come back. I'm going to let him play a week or two. I'm going to let that play out, because I know that the value bounce back is going to be there. And honestly, for these rebuilding teams, I'm almost more apt to be taking a chance on the Jordan Loves, taking a chance on the guys that are injured right now for multiple weeks. Let me go get the TJ Hawkinson. Let me give you points on my roster right now to be able to give me somebody that I can put on an IR slot that has significant value, that we've seen do it as well. Absolutely love it.
Especially if your league does its draft picks for the non-playoff teams by max points for it.
Yes.
Because you're getting points off of your roster regardless. Even if it's just you're able to get rid of guys who maybe could score 10, probably not going to, but could. if they fall into the right situation, when you can get those guys off your roster, you're making your draft pick better, but you're also making your future team better, because people can say what they want about TJ Hawkinson. What we know about him is he is an elite target earner at the NFL level who's consistently scoring within the top 5 at his position, and just it gets disrespected because he hasn't had 1,000-yard season or never scored a ton of but if you're playing in a PPR format, we know that's valuable. Or a team that one of the absolute best trades ever was when Justin Jefferson was hurt last year, and you could flip Jamar Chase for Justin Jefferson and get something else on top of it. It was just free money. It was literally the free money glitch that was going viral on TikTok, but actually like useful and not, check fraud. Like you're getting an elite asset who is just not scoring points right now, but we know that more than likely when they're healthy, they're going to be elite again. And it's one of, if not my favorite ways to actually rebuild, is just buy guys who are hurt.
Yep.
So you alluded real quick. Yeah, Mike, the value window here. Let's talk about this a little bit. So what I was trying to do, going back to the Shields League here, I'm saying, okay, I see where my team is at right now. I see the injuries that have occurred. I also realize that there aren't very many teams selling, if any, at this point, and there's a decent amount of teams that think that they're there. So with that, I'm basically forcing myself into a seller's market because I know there's multiple teams that can sell themselves on hope of, hey, like I'm one piece away here right now. If I can get this one piece in September, oh yeah, that's going to make all the difference.
I'm one of them.
Yeah, come November, that may not be the case. We've seen the plethora of injuries that have happened, the variance that occurs in fantasy football year in and year out. So we see all of that. So first value window, in my opinion, for a seller that can realize that they're a rebuilding team, maybe not even a rebuilding team, maybe just a retooling team. Maybe they're going back to the well to be able to push to next year. You don't have to fully tear anything down.
Yep.
You can re-strategize. You can change your roster construction to be able to fit a little bit better of what we've already seen this class is going to produce. We can fit the roster construction to what the league is willing to give. Once you get into the league and you get a couple years, you start realizing how guys value different positions a little bit better. So I think that's really the first window. The second window is going to be the trade deadline. Maybe there's another window in between there. I haven't really seen a clear, concise opening on that. But if you want to be the first team to sell, typically it's week 2, week 3. You really have to jump on it early. And then it's kind of a dead zone where everybody's kind of jockeying a little bit for position. Nobody really wants to admit that their team's bad. They could be 1-4 after 5 weeks. And they're like, my team's like second in points for. I'm just getting screwed on matchups.
Never bad, just unlucky.
There's those teams. Yeah, you're just unlucky like that.
Yeah.
And you can be able to sell them like, man, this guy's going to get you over the hump. Like you're so close every week. You're losing by 2-3 points. And you can easily sell those players to those folks at that time, if you want to be able to jockey for it. But trade deadline, in my opinion, is really the one that you're going to start seeing the sellers really be the sellers and the teams that are playoff teams really be the playoff teams. That's the point where the fringe teams start to become all that more important. And you really start looking at them saying, these are the teams that I want to attack to be able to try and go get their first, because I really don't think they're a playoff team. And if they are, I think they're losing in the first round.
Yep. Random question, not random, it's related to this. Have any of you heard of the Stanford marshmallow experiment?
Delayed gratification, baby.
Nope.
All right.
Can't say that I have.
They took a group of kids and they said, I will give you 1 marshmallow now, but I'm going to leave the room. And if you don't eat that marshmallow, I'm going to give you 2. What Jake was talking about earlier with trading for future rookie classes is literally the Stanford marshmallow experiment, but with dynasty managers across the world. So if you have a pick, it does not matter what year it is. Like it does, because there's an opportunity cost with point scoring, but that pick is only going to gain value. It is only ascending as people start to catch up. Rookie fever bites them in the butt. And Evan was talking about these windows. there's a window if you're the first seller. There's a window at the trade deadline. And then there's another window that opens up, which almost flips what your mindset should be right before the rookie draft. So if you're doing what Jake was talking about, where you're grabbing these players, but you're also grabbing picks, you're grabbing, like, moving within your tiers, but getting additional capital, you don't have to make all 26 picks that you've traded for. Instead, flip 5 of them and get a stud on your roster. So that's just, little tangent there. We want to get back to like some of the initial triggers. I know that we've gone full circle on this already, and then we're going to get into some week 2 recap. What point are you willing to fold it in? Does it need to be I'm 0-2 and all of my players are hurt, or does it need to be you're just looking around? I know I have an answer in this, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. Like, when will you finally bite the bullet and say, this team is not competing in 2024? I had to look to 2025, or evergreen. This team isn't competing this year, is competing next year.
I'm going to leave it to Tim on this one because I feel like him and I are going to have very similar answers here.
Well, I think there's a lot that goes into it. Like, for example, you could be going into the season and know this team isn't it, but you just pick the times in which you're selling guys. Because for me, there's a even going back to the Worthy, Flowers, and Bowers trade. Mm-hmm. There's a raw points argument and there's a raw value argument. Raw points, easy to market guys that are scoring points in the season, especially running backs that don't carry value season to season, or guys that are streaking like a Naylor, who has the opportunity to score for 3 or 4 weeks if there are no more injuries. It could be longer if there are injuries. But that's where you get out on those guys, amass picks or other upside players that haven't hit yet. And the thing is, too, depth can hit very quickly, especially if you make the right trades or if guys fall into the second round of drafts for you, where non-premium picks turn into, I don't want to even say premium players, but contributing players that then help you level up to different players.
Yep.
So for me, honestly, a lot of when I plan a rebuild, it's in the off season. It's even after the rookie draft just happened. And I go, yeah, this team's not going anywhere. If I have a Josh Jacobs, I'm looking for a team, because for me, I'd rather get out on the running back as soon as possible. So there's no offseason injury that can screw me over. I'm looking for a team that needs a running back that I can sell. Hey, this guy can be another top 12 for you. You get the advantage on the majority of the rest of the league because you get that third guy that could be a running back 1 on your team. And then maybe I take a first and some upside receiver or something like that, because I like to transition running backs into receivers during a rebuild as much as possible. It's almost like a zag. So you go from like running back to receiver, then you take a bunch of the receivers that are like overvalued, but like just above roster clogger, bring those up to like a different player or different asset. Could be back to premium. Yeah, could even be premium running backs again once I'm ready to compete. But I don't want any running backs on my team if I'm rebuilding, because all that does, I don't like to play in leagues that are potential points, just because like you get punished for it in a lot of sense if you start to build your bench. But in that case, I don't want running backs on my team whatsoever. So that's when I'll be doing that again. But it's a lot of it, like, you start with one piece, you start to like build your war chest, you transfer in a lot of the assets in your war chest to more premium assets, and then start it over again by refilling your bench.
Yeah, I love that. You guys are smarter than I am, so you're probably able to evaluate your roster very clearly and just look at it and be like, this team can compete, this team cannot. I am not like smart enough to do that. So what I like to do is that I have trusted people that I look to. It's very easy for us to look at our team and be like, this guy's undervalued, this guy's undervalued, he's going to break out, everything's going to be great. But take a moment, share it with a friend. I send rosters and trades to Evan all the time. I'm like, is this a real competing roster? Or am I just fooling myself? I send them to some of my other friends like Eric, and I'm just like, hey man, how does this roster look? Because we get emotion, like you get tied into these players.
Right.
You're fired up, you're researching, you think you've figured out the skeleton key that's going to unlock fantasy football. Take a moment, get a second opinion, and figure out if this team is really competing or if they're just pretending. Make sure you're not fooling yourself ahead of time. Anything else on dynasty rebuilds before we get into some week 2 recap?
So I will say real quick, one of my favorite things on Sleeper is organizing my teams based off of the level that I think I'm competing in.
Yep.
So when you actually go in on that left side and you have all of your leagues listed, I want those teams that I think are playoff teams. I want to make sure that that's the first team that I'm checking, the first team that I'm going to, so I can be able to go down that list, and it gives me a priority order if something happens and I need to immediately try and jump on it. Say this past weekend, Evan Ingram's warming up in practice. Okay, well, great. We know the sleeper tool, you go into the player and you can just see all the leagues that you have them in. It was fantastic. It was one of the best tools that I could have asked for this weekend when I'm going, oh crap, Evan Ingram hurt himself in warmups. I need to get him out of my rosters. Yeah. And the first teams that I'm looking at are the teams that I think are my best teams, the teams that I don't want to accidentally get a loss in because I could have put in a Freiermuth or somebody else as an example. Yeah. Just Pat came to mind. So Penn State, Pittsburgh, I'm just repping both of us here, Mike. So yeah, that's one of the things that I really appreciate doing and really like, and I strongly suggest.
Yep. Which, hey, if you are listening and you know somebody at Sleeper, DM us. We want to talk. But let's talk about a little bit of week 2. Thanks, guys, for the very, very hopefully useful rebuilding strategy.
And now it's time for news and notes.
All right. First and foremost, we have Cooper Kupp out with a high ankle injury. We expect it to be 5 weeks. Evan, how do you feel about that?
Makes me so very sad because I have so much Matthew Stafford. And the fact that he now lost Puka and Cooper doesn't make me feel good about Stafford at all. I get it. He's still Stafford. He's still going to sling the ball. He's going to try and fit it into a window that nobody should ever try and fit a football into, but he'll try it.
Timmy,
and he's going to have to.
Timmy, which Rams receivers are you comfortable starting in a flex?
Pretty much Demarcus Robinson. I know that there was talk that
Tyler Johnson love.
Not really. I know that there was even talk about like Tutu being the speed threat, and that's like something that they're missing like really badly. So he could be someone that gets a lot of targets. But to me, it's Demarcus Robinson or Parkinson, and I think Parkinson is tough now without any receiving threats from like a Kupp or a Puka, where he's probably going to be someone that does get a decent amount of attention from the coverage. So that might even be difficult too now.
That's completely fair. Timmy, extremely personal question. How tall and how much do you weigh?
6 foot, 6 foot, 6'1", 6 foot. Okay. What do you think, Jay?
Is this?
And I'm like 240. I'm a fat kid.
Okay.
Is this the 5'6", like 150 moment for Tutu that you're going to mention, Mike?
Timmy has about a half foot and 80 pounds on Tutu Atwell. So do with that what you will. Moving on down, Deebo Samuel. We already talked about what possibly the implications could be with Juwan Jennings. Any love for Jacob Cowing in the crowd?
No.
Good.
He got so much hype in draft season, and I never understood why. Like, yes, he can do some cool stuff. There was that fun graphic where he was like the same as Tank Dell in like 4 different things, but it's like the guy wasn't that good in Conference USA. The guy was not that good at Arizona. Like I'm so tired of the Dynasty community in general overhyping these guys randomly, and I get it. They want to find. It's the same thing you talked about. We want to find those hidden gems. We want to find those scouts. We are all looking for the next Puka. We're looking for the next. You could even go back to like when Aaron Jones was a 5th round pick, and then all of a sudden he's one of the best running backs in football. Like, this is what people try and do every year, but it just gets boring. Like, how about we just hit on the good guys and then we get lucky, because that's what everyone is doing. There was so little Puka hype. There was like 3 people legitimately hyping him up, and then he turns out to be the star. Samuel Porta didn't get a ton of love, and then he ends up being the best tight end in the class. And
he did a JWB, but
that's a different story. Like, there's so little edge to truly gain from targeting those type of guys. because your best case scenario for 99% of them is that they're flex worthy players. So why do we spend so much time hyper focusing on these guys who are lucky to be in the league in the first place? They're day 3 picks. Sure, like Jacob Cowan could be Kyle Shanahan's daughter's boyfriend or something, and we don't know about it, and that could help him get starts. It's like the what was it, the Cup and Stafford breakfast thing. Like, it just blows my mind that we spend so much time on these guys and we just neglect so many other parts of how we can build good teams and find good players.
Yep. Jacob Cowing, 5th-year senior from UTEP and Arizona, 5'11", 170. If you're picking him up, you're very sad. We have a question from the chat. Mike Silva wants to know, Najee Harris is a buy low candidate. Let's talk about from a dynasty perspective. According to Dynasty Trade Calculator on Fantasy Calc, you can get Najee for a 2nd and a 3rd round pick. Would you be buying at that cost if you're a middle of the road team?
I'd be fine with it just because Najee's just going to be a perpetual contributor for years. He's going to be like just kind of consistently scoring. So, but he's never, like we talked about in the trade earlier, like he's never going to be valued as a top 12 guy. But 2nd and a 3rd, 2nd round picks, we have a 25% hit rate on. 3rd round picks, that drops like 12.5%. I'm giving up a 30% chance to find one contribution to my team for a guy that I know can contribute. I'm doing that more often than I'm not.
Very fair.
Something understated is Najee's ceiling. Very few running backs can hit 20 like Najee can in terms of the way that he can do it, where it's decent workload, 2 touchdowns, boom, 20 points. Most running backs can't offer that.
Yep. Plug and play RB2 in every format. I'm a little biased, but I would buy at those prices. Cool. All right. Back to news and notes. AJ Brown, surprise, like tweaked his hamstring in practice, out for at least a week or 2 more. Real bummer. Any love for any wide receiver on the Eagles not named Devonta Smith?
No.
Dallas Goedert.
No.
Not a receiver.
Yeah.
No. Not even Dallas Goedert. No. We're
The points per game queen.
I mean, best case scenario is Johan Dotson gets a chance to show his skills again. I think a guy who, by all accounts, reception perception, his average separation scores from fantasy points, like the guy is a good wide receiver, but he's just a much better NFL wide receiver than he is a fantasy asset. And that's the epitome of a lot of these guys that we're talking about him. We're talking about Juwan Jennings. In my opinion, George Pickens falls into this category, but at a higher level, where these guys are better for the football teams that they're on than they will be for us as fantasy assets. The Eagles are a team with their construction, great offensive line, quarterback who can run. They have Saquon. They've shown the affinity to give Kenny Gainwell touches in the past. You know, Will Shipley, if you're a believer, he can contribute as well. This is a team that can convert to being a more run-heavy team on the fly and have success with it just because of the pieces that they have. So the main volume with AJ Brown out is going to go to Devonta Smith. Goddard's going to continue to get his, 5 for 65 and maybe fall into the end zone. But past that, it's like, I mean, we saw it last night, like Britton Covey had 6 targets, but it was like 26 yards. If you're in full PPR and you get 8.6 points out of a flex guy, you're pretty sad usually, unless you're a rebuilder and you're like, oh, awesome. I left 20 on my bench with this random running back that decided to score this week. Like, it's just, a lot of the times when these big names get hurt, there's just no true replacement. There's not a guy who can put up that level of production or even a fraction of it.
Are you implying that Jahan Dotson is not AJ Brown? That's pretty rude.
I love Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson, another guy, JWB, absolutely loved. We handle our L's when we take them. Yep. I still think, again, he's a lot like Rashad Bateman in the sense that everything tells us this guy should be a really good receiver, but we just don't get to see it because of the schemes that they're in or because of how they're used. So they just end up remaining better for their teams than they do for our teams.
Yeah. If this injury opens up any trade window for Dallas Goedert, absolutely take it.
Dallas Goedert.
If you can tier up from Dallas Goedert, I love it. If you're looking for a like plug and play streamer, it's fine. I guess.
I'm cashing out on any sort of pick or improvement towards any other position that I can get. To me, he's not a needle mover whatsoever at the tight end position. He's replaceable by a bunch of tight ends that are ranked just below him most weeks. And I still like Dotson, but the thing is, it's just not a good situation for him to score points consistently. So,
yeah,
if you could get an injured Ferguson for Goddard right now,
100%.
Oh yeah, I'd take Ferguson. Well, I would take Dak Prescott's tight end. Who like
sure.
You saw Luke Schoonmaker just plug in and immediately get the same volume. That's just hilarious. Real quick on Johan Dotson, we're going to move on to the next news and notes. 0.83 yards per out run, 92nd in the NFL in 2023. Really good, really green on charts though, so that's cool. Isaiah Pacheco fractured his fibula, which Evan wrote 8 weeks here. I've seen very, very optimistic beat reporters say 6 weeks, probably closer to 8, maybe 9 or 10. Carson Steele, Samaje Perine, Kareem Hunt. Somebody sift through that for me, please.
Carson Steele. He rides an alligator.
Oh, he's sick.
Come on.
I love him.
He is awesome. He was so much fun to watch at Ball State, a little bit of Maction back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was watching those games on Wednesday night. What else am I doing?
4.7, 940 fullback. Let's go, baby.
I think the argument...
They were giving him carries already.
Yeah.
That's the argument. He fumbled, and they were still trying to give him carries.
Yep.
The argument can be made that you could say P. Ryan or some of the vets, but we've seen that 6 seasons now. P. Ryan doesn't take that massive volume that everyone thinks that he's going to take in any scenario or any situation he's been in. Now I like him for the receiving game because I don't think any running back really takes over, but the risk and the upside of the unknown in Steele is greater than what is for P. Ryan in terms of what you should be paying for or how you should be kind of assessing the situation. I think P. Ryan is safer with receiving. I think also the receiving gives him good upside if he gets the work, which we have no guarantee yet. But also the same thing can happen for Steele, and Steele is nearly 100% unknown.
Yep. Standard leagues, it's very clear to me. It's Carson Steele with a bullet.
Yep.
PPR, if you need like a emergency RB2, like everything has gone poorly, maybe take a swing on Pirine, but Hunt, likely dust, but he's familiar with the system, so he's going to get touches that make us cry. I love the call out of Steele being the unknown. What's up,
I
Jake?
will say with Carson Steele, he had a higher target share, market share, or target market share in college than Kenneth Walker ever did.
Yep.
He can catch passes.
Michigan State refuses to throw passes.
Yeah.
Every time they did,
he still can't do it in the NFL. He still can't catch passes. Lord. I'm just saying.
More receptions in the NFL than he did in college already.
Can we mute this man or what?
Yeah, but also he's never been run.
Anyway, so now Tua Tagovailoa, welcome back, Jake, has been put on IR in order to see a concussion specialist. Does anybody here think Tua's going to retire? I think that's like a hot take artist thing. Should he? Different discussion.
If he has one more, he absolutely should retire.
We said that 2 years ago.
I understand why, but also it's just clear at this point, like the man's brain needs extra protection. Like he should be out there in a guardian cap.
Yes,
absolutely. He shouldn't be lowering his shoulder in the first place. That was just a terrible football decision. The man lost weight, got smaller, already wasn't big,
and then dropped his shoulder on a safety. It was Tua's head versus DeMar Hamlin's chest. No one was winning.
Thigh, knee, whatever it was. Tua's not winning that one. He's just not. He's not a big boy, but he's not going to retire. But it's sad to see. Like I'm a guy who's had a lot of concussions. I've seen the results of me having a lot of concussions, and mine were far. I've never had the fencing posture that he's had now multiple times in the NFL. I don't have this history on my body of taking all of these hits on top of all the other injuries that Tua's had to deal with in his career and life, more than likely compared to me. It's sad to see, but like there comes a point where somebody's got to protect Tua from himself.
Completely agree. But from purely a football, and let's talk about it from fantasy football, Tua likely not a solution for your 1 QB redraft leagues. In Dynasty, his value is so, like, you don't want to be the guy that's sending out trade offers for somebody like this, but buy low? Question mark?
Yeah, go if you have a team with Sam Darnold and Gardner Minshew on it right now, and you're not starting either of them, go hit up the Tua manager and see if you can get him. Because best case for Darnold, even if Darnold's season in Minnesota this year earns him a job next year, value-wise, what he peaks at what Baker peaked at previously, like quarterback 2021,
quarterback 2 in 2024 so far.
I'm aware. I love Baker Mayfield,
number 1 quarterback in the league right now.
But even so, I don't actually think he is. I think it's Derek Carr.
No, I checked. It's him.
But like neither Minshew nor Darnold has a ceiling that's going to push the top 12 quarterbacks. Where like if Tua somehow comes back, avoids a concussion for the next 2 years, there's a lot of people who already put Tua in their top 12. There's a lot of people who will say, oh, look what he came back from. He's still productive, led the league in passing, yada, 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 all that fun stuff about Tua, where it's like most people recognize he probably shouldn't be ranked as a top 12 quarterback, but the perceived market on him is just infinitely better than what it can be for those other guys. So that's the prime time to, like we talked about earlier in the episode with the rebuild portion, buying injured players. You send off pieces who are scoring now, but the market on them is just never going to be what it is for these other guys.
Completely agree.
Can I ask a scenario real quick? When you say sell low, what is a sell low or buy low to you? I'm sorry for Tua.
I mean, Jake was talking about Gardner Minshew and Sam Darnold, like some of those guys into 2 and see if it hits.
I'm the guy that one of my like dynasty rules is you can never have too many quarterbacks. But
yes,
I'm pretty much out on Tua. I took over an orphan, and the first thing I did was get rid of Tua. This was 2 years ago. I'm not in on him. He led the league in passing when he was QB9. Like that's what his ceiling is. And now the fact that he's gotten another concussion, what do we think his rushing upside is? I would think 0. It's almost negligible to nothing.
Right. But I'm advocating for acquiring Tua for the pure fact that Tua comes back, rest of this year is really, really good. You sent a second now, rest of the season, no more injuries, no concussions. He puts up, fringe quarterback 1 numbers. I could probably get a first and second for him in the offseason. I
mean, it's possible, but I'm just not one that wants to hold that bag. And I get it. Like if it's a Minshew in a second, that you can stomach that. I will recognize that. But I don't know. It's just there's so many factors you got to jump over, and then the fact that if he even just up and retires, like it's just not a risk I want to be involved in.
Yep. I see both sides in this. I would much rather re-roll with a 2025 quarterback, even though we don't think the class is that strong. Just get a first rounder that has a job with way less injury concern. But he can still come back and lead the league in passing because anybody that's throwing at Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Jonnu Smith, who's elite apparently. Let's get into our last things. If you're listening to this podcast, you already know Jordan Love out with a knee injury, Jake Ferguson out with a knee injury, Evan Ingram out with a hamstring, which he tweaked during warmups of the game, which is the worst possible scenario. I want to talk to you guys about Marshawn Lloyd real quick. Back to rebuilding, back to dynasty. Is Marshawn Lloyd the type of player you should be trying to acquire, or is he still just a mystery box that you're worried about?
I'm trying to get as much as I can. I was trying to get as much as I can. He's the perpetual. I mean, he's a lot like Tua in the sense he just can't really stay healthy. Didn't really do it in college. Hasn't been, shown the ability to do it right now. But the acquisition cost is near 0 at this point. Starting a season inactive, injured week 1, seeing what was it? Again, 2 touches week 2, and then now he's on IR or going on IR. Like the perception of him is just getting lower and lower, but like there's a chance if I can acquire backup running backs or perceived backup running backs for 3rd or 4th round picks, it's the easiest way to gain future value. Because even if Jacobs gets hurt when Lloyd is healthy, Lloyd goes out and has 1 or 2 good games, you can probably get multiple seconds. You can tier up into a wide receiver, tight end, low tier quarterback. There's just more flip opportunities for running backs than there is any other position in football because of the injury rate of the position. So they're my favorite. Backup running backs are one of my favorite things to trade for, period.
Completely agree. Evan and I have pretty fun saying that we say around here: any running back on a 53, they make the cut. Thank you. We're running up on time. Timmy, you can find him on Twitter at Nubs, 2 N's, 2 B's, or Jake at Perry_FF. Thanks so much for coming on, guys. I hope you had fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Evan, you want to talk about W real quick?
W gives me the energy to be able to get through the day. You know, I'm sitting in these meetings, listening to these boring developers try and talk about how much money they're going to make and how I'm just stopping them from making money. And I just say, man, I'm really sleepy listening to you. But how do I get jazzed when I get done with that meeting? I drink some W, and it gets me going right back again, back helping the Titans to build a beautiful brand new stadium.
I love it. Use code FFRPG at checkout for a little bit off. Timmy, Jake, thanks so much for coming on, boys. Don't launch into a rebuild early. But if you saw warning signs that we talked about tonight, shoot us a DM. We'll help you out. Have a good night, everybody.